comes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Dr. Mahan.
Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Tonight is night 7. We hit the 1 week mark.
Yeah, 1 week. That's almost 1/4. So
that's right. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, it's really, really whizzing by. But this has been nice to be with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and it's been a spiritually renewing practice. This has really become part of my Ramadan practice. This Ramadan, it's been really nice. Something I look forward to. What better thing?
7.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go
Which
ahead.
means it's the 7th juz'a. It's the 7th portion.
The end of Al-Ma'idah, the table spread, which is chapter number 5, and moving into An'am, cattle.
Yeah.
Which is chapter number 6, Surat Al-An'am. There's a couple of things. If it's okay, we wrap up from chapter 5, one from the previous part that we didn't get to, but it's an interesting verse, and a couple from this part 7 from Al-Ma'idah, the table spread, and then we'll move to chapter 6, inshallah.
Okay, and just a word of explanation for people who are just joining us. So we are, if you're new to this Qur'an Unscripted, what we're doing on these nights, these 30 nights of Ramadan, is we are moving through the Qur'an in 30 equal portions, or roughly equal portions. And these portions are not part of the original Quranic revelation or anything. It's just that scholars portioned out the Qur'an so that the Qur'an could be covered fully through the nights of Ramadan, the 30 nights of the month of Ramadan. And so we're moving through those. We're now in the 7th portion, and these portions, roughly speaking, we're going to get some clarification tonight about this, but roughly speaking, the Qur'an is not a linear book. It's more of a circular book, or a book of concentric circles moving forward. And it's also kind of counter chronological, meaning that the early chapters of the Qur'an are really some of the latest to have been revealed over a period of about 23 years. So for those 23 years, this was a growing recitation. And so when the Archangel Gabriel is believed to have been relating these verses to the Prophet Muhammad, ﷺ, upon him be peace, he would also receive instructions about where to insert these new verses or these new recitations. And so it was a growing recitation for 23 years until the final year of the Prophet's life. And that recitation is not in chronological order. It doesn't function like a conventional book, let's say, with a beginning, middle, and an end. And so what we're doing is we're almost moving backward in time from the later revelations toward the earlier revelations as we journey through these 30 parts. So what do we need to clear up from last time, Dr. Mahan?
Well, I'll tell you.
The mission and vision of the American Islamic College, to me, pretty much now synonymous with the work. I believe in the transformative power of education, and not just education that is informative, but in education that is transformative, education that really changes how we live. But I think that the Muslims of America need a place that they can come as a Muslim space. This is their space. It belongs to them.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I was looking at verse 54 of Surah Ma'idah, the table spread. O you who believe. And the study Quran has an interesting rendition of this. Whosoever among you should renounce his religion. مَن يَرْتَدَّ مِنْكُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِ. But maybe, should retreat almost. hesitate, renouncing for irtidad is more of a technical term that may not have been applicable here, but whosoever is not really, who's accepted but then retreated and is doubting or wavering to this call of the Prophet. So whosoever does this, God will bring a people whom He loves and who love Him. So yuhib, it's yuhibbuhum wa yuhibbunahu. So He loves them and they love Him. So love is definitely something that's not absent. People say, last time we talked about justice as being central in this tradition, whereas love in other traditions, but it's far more complex than that. And here you can clearly see that love is very central in the relationship to the divine, and that really drives all attitudes. Ultimately, when you're in love, it's no longer a calculation; it's all in. And so, basically, here it's a call to be all in. And if you don't do it, almost a collective, address to a people, that other people can come in, other communities you'll be replaced. Humble, and they're humble towards the believers, stern towards the disbelievers. So there's also this moment. You can see the table spread is a late Medinan surah, between those who have been rejecting and persecuting the community of believers and the Prophet, and the community of believers. This conflict is reaching a crescendo, and so it's time to take sides especially when you're in the presence of the messenger, and there's real persecution happening and liberation almost being called for. Striving in the way of God. Yujahiduna fi sabil, and there's the word jihad. They strive in the way of God with their lives and their wealth, as we'll see in other places. So they devote their bodily capacities, their intellects, their limbs, and also their wealth. So their ambitions and the things they strive for in their lives in the way of God, and fearing not the blame of any blamer. Because when you're in this worldly struggle, they're going to ridicule and dismiss and sideline and perhaps boycott or persecute. And this is a real moment of truth, right, for believers, is do they fear God or do they fear the people? And then they will be tested if they stand with God. That is the bounty of God which He gives to whomsoever He will, and God is all-encompassing, all-knowing. So that was one verse that I wanted to point out.
Pause there just for a second?
Of course.
There's one word, one translation there, in I don't know if you're using the Study of Qur'an translation, but I have difficulty when the word kafirin here is translated as disbelievers. Just because I think that the root of kafara is, to me, it's about ingratitude, it's about rejection, it's about covering over, and so really, when the Quran is referring to these people, the kuffar, it's really these are the people. It wasn't that they believed differently. It was that they were actively opposing and trying to eradicate this monotheistic movement. So, and this is one of the reasons why, in the surahs that we've been reading, the peoples of the book are labeled separately. They're spoken of separately. And so it's not that they're the kafirin are let's say the disbelievers. I think it's more that these are the people who are actively trying to kill and eradicate the Muslim community. And so there was a conflict and a war going on. People died, and also one of the things that we're going to read about later on tonight is we're going to read about people who are constantly trying to turn the religion into a lie, constantly trying to trick it or trip it up, and so these are
Right.
not that these people have a different belief system. It's that they were in active opposition to the monotheistic movement of Islam. And so I think that's important to clarify, because
Yeah.
sometimes people indiscriminately just think that anyone who doesn't self-identify as a Muslim is part of this category. And I think that's not a Quranically responsible position to take.
That's an important clarification you make, because later on we'll see very clearly where the Quran will say, God doesn't prevent you from dealing well and having relations with those who haven't persecuted you and driven you out of your homes and so on. So there's a certain category of people with whom there is an active opposition that is being referred to, and not just blanket disbelievers. So I appreciate that clarification. The other place I wanted to draw attention to was 93.
Mm.
One of the questions that arose was people who had done all these things that are being called out as sinful and impure, and now they're coming to the way of the Prophet, and they're feeling guilty about things they had done prior to having heard the call, as if they were in violation even from some kind of innate disposition perspective of an inner disposition that should have been natural. And so what's being told here is there's no blame, this is verse 93, upon those who believe and perform righteous deeds for what they have already eaten.
Mm.
Like the things you used to do and consume in the past, there's no blame on that. You're turning over a new leaf. You're being born again. I don't know if I should use these terms, but you're coming to a kind of new life. And then the verse goes on. It's very interesting. It says, so long as they are reverent, and there's the word taqwa. We talked about this. They have some self-restraint and believe and perform righteous deeds, then are reverent and believe, the righteous deeds are gone. ثُمَّ اتَّقَوْا, and then they are reverent. وَأَحْسَنُوا, and they are translated here as virtuous. But for those of you who are familiar with the terminology, iman, going from iman, amal salih, and all the way to ihsan. So almost there's Islam, iman, and ihsan, these three terms of a kind of ritual observance, an inner conviction, and then something that's experiential in a mystical or a spiritual sense. And you come to a point where if your reverence grows or rises to such a point such that you will no longer be concerned with the difference between deed and an inner condition, and what is required of you almost becomes so harmonious that you can't separate these various different states. I thought this was a really profound kind of a relationship of inner growth through the various stages that I just wanted to point out. And God loves the virtuous. Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin.
And the again that and God loves not just those who do good. I think you're right that highest form really is the stage of beautification, because that root, husn, is beauty. And so it's that virtue leads to a form of beautification, that and that God loves those people who are beautified by their their inner and outer states. That's nice.
Yeah. And I also feel there's a state where you feel you're required to do things but you don't feel like doing them, but you force yourself because you're expected to do them, right? And there's this inner struggle. But there comes a point where that vanishes if you keep moving along the path, and it all just becomes clear and natural and just organic.
Mm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and of course, joyous.
Enjoys, and
Yeah.
like you said, beautiful. You know, husn,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
ihsan. That's what the word signifies. Now,
Mhm.
the last place in Al-Ma'idah, at least that I wanted to put, there's so much more in Al-Ma'idah, like we said
Sure.
about Christology, that people can explore. But something new and different was I believe it's verse 100. Oh, you who believe, and you see the same formula. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. It's kind of a refrain that runs through Al-Ma'idah. Ask not about things which, if they were disclosed to you, would trouble you.
Mm.
Because the companions would often ask questions, and they're different in the tafsir. There's so many interesting occasions for this verse, and I won't go into them, but and I invite you to read them and explore this for yourselves. But what really interests me in reading this is, you know, you think of the Quran as this kind of reified text that was in primordial existence, that came down, although it came down in historical time. It was, you know, it was basically God saying to the believers, here's what it is. But this shows a kind of reciprocity in the actual generation, I don't know, of the Quran, in a way
Mhm.
that it's interacting with the believers, and God is listening actively to them, and the questions are being heard, and the revelation is coming in a dialogue with how the community is responding, which makes the Quran more interesting in a way, and also historical in ways that sometimes people find uncomfortable thinking about. But I just think
Well,
it's
yeah.
undeniable here, at least in the way that it's phrased.
Well, and it's, you know, the Quran's relationship to history is a very interesting one, because it does, as you say, it was revealed little by little within particular contexts and occasions, what are called the asbab, the occasions of revelation. But at the same time, Muslims believe that it's somehow outside of history, and so it's really, really interesting. And so it also came into being in a historical language, right? This is 7th century Arabic, and so
Right.
and one of the best ways to prepare for reading the Quran is by studying the pre-Islamic Arabian poetry, and the existing the very rich and grammatically complex language of the Arabs in that period. So and at the same time, right, the Quran speaks of a preserved tablet in the next world or in paradise. You know that if all the oceans of the world were ink and all the trees were pens, it would not suffice to write what's on that tablet. And so the Quran is part of that, and all the revelations are kind of coming from that preserved tablet in the other realm. But and so the Quran is kind of outside of history, and yet it's inside of history, and there are lots of passages here that we've been looking at that really do reflect what that community was going through, you know, in
Right.
terms of even last night we talked about the idea of praying in shifts so that people could stand guard because there was danger. And so the idea of protecting one another even during prayer by praying in shifts and not praying all together. And so here too you have the Quran is responding to clearly something that was happening on the ground between the prophet and those early believers.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and so here, you know, I'm going to finish the verse. O you who believe, ask not about things which, if they were disclosed to you, would trouble you. And if you ask about them while the Quran is being sent down, they will be disclosed to you. So the Quran will
Mm.
actually be a different Quran depending on how you're responding to it.
Hmm.
God has pardoned this, and God is forgiving and clement. One of the occasions for revelation was, someone when the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, was made obligatory, a companion asked every year, and the prophets stayed quiet. And this verse is an occasion to pronounce on that. Why do you want to? It didn't say every year, and if you say every year, and now it says every year, it's going to be just incredibly difficult and impossible for people to fulfill that. And so chill out, and God wants ease for you, and don't make this overly complicated. So I think there's really interesting interesting guidance here, just in that one verse. I just didn't want to pass over it when it caught my eye.
It reminds me of a funny episode once in a interfaith conversation. We were explaining that Muslims pray 5 times a day, and it sounded so onerous that somebody from the Christian group asked if we get weekends off. God at least gave Muslims the weekends off, so they didn't have to do this 5 times daily prayer on the weekends. And I had to give her the bad news that even on weekends. Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So let's move into
just one more on that. Sometimes when you tell people we fast the month of Ramadan, they think you fast the whole month. Like you don't stop in the evening.
It would be a very thin community. Yes, if that were the case.
It would be a thin community.
Okay.
All right.
So there is a lot more that we could explore, actually, just from Al-Ma'idah. And and just interestingly, we haven't talked much about the naming of the surahs, but the name of this surah comes really toward the end, where Jesus is asking God for food for him and for his disciples, and the food, which is Al-Ma'idah, is sent down by God to them from above, and so the Ma'idah is in a way one of the table spread with food, or the food is indicative of course the many miracles that the Quran attributes to Jesus, and that surah in particular seems to be very concerned about clarifying who Jesus was, and his relationship to God, and his human nature. So that's good. Okay, so we're now moving into the surah of the cattle, the 6th surah, the 6th chapter.
Yeah, and this is, if I could say a word about the arrangement of the Quran, this arrangement has been studied at least in one interesting way by Amin Hassan Islahi and his teacher Farahi, and Mustansir Mir has written about this. So we're now going to a Meccan surah, a surah that was revealed earlier on. And so the Quran will do this back and forth. By and large, the surahs are in descending order. And after Al-Fatiha, the opening 7 verses, it's a later revelation. And the last verses in the Quran are going to be some of the earlier revelations, but in between it'll go back and forth between Meccan, which is early, and Medinan, which is later. And so we're going back to 2 Meccan surahs. This is the cattle, and Al-A'raf, the heights. One is more early or mid Meccan, and the one is late Meccan. And then we're going to go to 2 Medinan surahs after that, Al-Anfal, which is again early Medinan, and At-Tawbah, which is late Medinan, towards the end. So there's this interesting structure there, where according to this group of scholars, the Quran actually has thematic groups of Meccan and Medinan, surahs. And you'll see here that the cattle, it's very interesting that the miracle of the table is mentioned in the previous surah, because here it's going to say they're going to ask you, a prophet, for a miracle. Forget about it. The signs are all around them, and this Quran is really the miracle. And so Al-An'am is more at-tadhkir bi ala'illah, like a reminder to the people through the signs of God. And then you'll see A'raf, the next surah, which will be at-tadhkir bi ayyamillah, through the days, the prophets, the stories of the prophets. And so there's this thematic reciprocity as well between the Meccan pairs in this group, and we'll see something similar in the Medinan pairs, which according to some reports is actually a single surah, Anfal and Tawbah, but others will say they're two different surahs. So this is an interesting and chronologically very, very, and we'll try and break it up a little bit, I think, as we go along, but I think that's sufficient here. The other thing with An'am is the surahs. The surah is the word for chapter. I hope people are getting this by now. Were revealed piecemeal, especially the longer ones. They didn't all come down all at once, but at different occasions for revelation. But An'am is reported to have come down all at once, the whole surah.
Yeah.
And it's surrounded by 70,000 angels. It's a glorious kind of descent of this surah. And it's almost kind of, it's got a rapid pace, which is evocative of the early Meccan period. And it's almost worth kind of just reading it through and quickly translating it with rapidity so you get a sense of it. So maybe explore it that way. Yeah, those are some introductory words. I don't know if
and I just want to, there may be some people who are still a little confused about the Meccan and the Medinan. So in that 23-year period of revelation, the prophet and the early community were in his hometown of Mecca, of course, and in 622 they were run out for under threat for their very lives, and they relocated to the city of Medina, about 200 miles away, and so the early period, the Meccan period, as Mahan said, is often these are short poetic surahs which often reflect kind of the theological, like the God, this life and the next life and Judgment Day and other things, and then when the community was able to form with some safety and some stability and security in Medina, that's where some of the more legal details come. Laws about inheritance and marriage and divorce and the things that the community needed as they were building a society and as they were really building a community and trying to work out all of the intricacies and complexities of what it means to live in a society that was multi-religious, but it was still a society that allowed them to shape their lives according to the revelation. And so in those early days in Mecca, it was more of a monotheistic prophetic call that was very much against the culture and was not yet able to think about setting up a society. And so we do feel, you can feel the difference sometimes between a Meccan surah and a Medinan surah, or sometimes even between a Meccan verse and a Medinan verse. But that's kind of where all of that comes from. The one thing I'd like to just start, because I think there's so much here that is important. There's a lot of talk in the surah of the cattle, Surah Al-An'am, about how the prophets all were treated badly, and how people and so there's a kind of reassurance that don't be discouraged by that, because all of the prophets were treated badly and they were all maligned. But there are two verses here that are linked to one another. There's verse 12 and verse 54, where something really startling to me, and I've commented on this before and preached about this too, that really that's something very radical. And there is a sense in Islam that God is so beyond all of our thought and imagining that we have words for God, and we have words for the qualities of God, and we we see the actions of God in creating the heavens and the earth and all of these things. There's so much that we know kind of in a very limited way about who God is and what God is. But God is eternally akbar. God is eternally beyond language, beyond our ability to think and comprehend. And so God is free, really. As some scholars have said, that, God describes God's self as being just, but what God means by that is beyond our ability to understand, because we can't impose our human concept of fairness or justice upon God, because God is beyond all thought and imagining. But there are two places here where God uses very powerful language to say that God has bound God's self with rahmah, with mercy, or what we talked about, this love, which is filled with connotations of the mother's love, the maternal love. And so we see it here in 12, and then we see it again in 54. And the one in 54, I think, is really instructive, because it says, that when those who believe in our communications and our ayat, our signs, come to you, say to them, peace be upon you. Your Lord has ordained mercy upon himself. That kataba rabbukum ala nafsihi ar-rahma. That God has, this is the same language that is used when we hear that fasting has been prescribed for us, has been commanded for us, it's been ordained for us. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, that fasting has been written for you. Here it is, God has written upon God's self rahmah, which to me means that there's nothing we can talk about in this religion outside of the canopy of rahmah. That no matter what else happens, even when we look at threats of punishment and any other aspect of the religion, that nothing in this religion can be properly understood outside of the context of rahmah. And then rahmah becomes a kind of interpretive or hermeneutic key for understanding everything else in the Qur'an, because it is the only thing in the Qur'an that it is said that God has written upon God's self. And so to me, this is like this to me is it's like it's like having dessert before dinner. It just totally fills you up, and like I can't think now about anything else, because these verses are just so monumental for me, theologically. I think that if there's go ahead.
I can sense the impact of this, and it's important to center it because of just why you've described how you've described the language that's used in conveying this prescribing upon oneself. It's very, very powerful. And so if we think of everything that seems to be harsh or punishing or retribution in the Quran, think of it like a mother's warning a child or threatening a child because she has nothing but the best of intentions, and she wants only the best, and so it seems harsh and severe, but it's only for the good. And so that's really it transforms the way we hear some of them to be more difficult and challenging and even threatening. I'm going to read. Can I read the first? There's a rhyme to this. So the verses end with a rhyme, like
I know, and you love these rhymes. Yes.
يعدلون تمترون ما تكسبون معرضين. There's a little shift, from un to in, and then it'll come back. Yes, that's un, and those shifts are also interesting, because that where it shifts to the in, it says that verse number 4. It says, never did a sign from among the signs of their Lord come unto them, but they turned away from it. I mean, it's just an emphatic, it begins with, if I'm going to read the first 12 and come to your rahmah, can I do that quickly?
Yeah.
I'll just do it in English so you feel the rhythm. Praise be to God who created the heavens and the earth and made darkness and light. Yet those who do not believe ascribe equals to their Lord. He it is who created you from clay, then decreed a term. A term is appointed with him, yet still you doubt. He is God, and he knows your secret and that which you make public, and he knows that which you earn. Never did a sign from among the signs of their Lord come unto them, but they turned away from it. But that they turned away from it. They indeed denied the truth when it came unto them, but tidings will soon come to them of that which they used to mock. Have they not considered how many a generation we destroyed before them? We had established them on the earth more firmly than we have established you. And we sent the sky upon them with abundant rains and made rivers flow beneath them. Then we destroyed them for their sins and brought into being after them another generation. Had we sent down unto thee a book inscribed on parchment, such that they could touch it with their hands, those who do not believe would have said, this is naught but manifest sorcery. And they would say, why has not an angel been sent down unto him? They're looking for miracles. Had we sent down an angel, then the matter would have been decreed, and they would be granted no respite. Had we made him an angel, we would have made him a man, thus obscuring for them that which they themselves obscure. Messengers have surely been mocked before thee. Then those were beset by that which they used to mock. Say, journey upon the earth, and behold how the deniers fared in the end. Say, unto whom belong whatsoever is in the heavens and on the earth? Say, unto God. He has prescribed mercy for himself. He will surely gather you on the day of resurrection, in which there is no doubt. Those who have lost their souls, they do not believe. So it's very, the whole, it continues like this for like over 110 verses.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it clearly indicates that the prophet at this time, upon him be peace, that the prophet was experiencing a lot of mockery and scoffing and ridicule.
Yeah.
And so it clearly, these verses are being sent down almost as a comfort to kind of strengthen him and to strengthen his resolve and to give him comfort at a time when clearly he was being abused by people because of the prophetic claims and what he was teaching.
Right. And it's also very strong in its address to the prophet, because exactly what you said, if you see verse 30, starting verse 33, I believe, we know well that what they say grieves thee. And this thee is always addressing the prophet in the singular.
Right.
Yet it is not thee that they deny. Rather, it is the signs of God that the wrongdoers reject. Surely messengers were denied before thee, and they bore patiently their being denied and persecuted till our help came to them. None alters the words of God, and there has already come unto thee some tidings of the messengers. And now listen to this. And if their turning away is distressing to thee, then seekest if thou canst. This is the study older. Then seekest if thou canst a tunnel into the earth. This is addressing the prophet, or a ladder unto the sky, that thou mightest bring them a sign. Like if you want a miracle other than what God is sending down, why don't you dig into the earth or build a ladder to the? It's not. This is it. Had God willed, he would have gathered them all to guidance. So do not be from amongst the ignorant. وَلَا تَكُنْ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. This is like, really really strong. I mean, ignorant here is not, I don't like this translation here at this point, because it can also be, don't be emotional. Don't be overcome with, don't let your rational faculties be overtaken by your emotion because of how much you care for them. And that can be also, a state of jahala. So
or delusion in a way. Speaking of rational faculties, if I can speed us forward to, because I know time is ticking and we're losing our hour again, but there's a beautiful passage here in this chapter on the cattle, the an'am, about Abraham, and how
Yes.
he's doing precisely what you're advocating, that is to use his intellect and to be firm, like not to be emotional, but to be very firm in his usage of his intellect. So this is, I'm looking now at verse 76 and following, and actually 75 and following, where Abraham, who's a Mesopotamian growing up in a polytheistic, animistic world, is using his intellect to question why the sun would be worshipped if the sun sets, or why the moon would be worshipped if the moon sets. And so there's a beautiful kind of suite of verses that goes through the rational thinking process and the critical thinking process of Abraham, God's friend, as the Quran calls him, as he then allows his critical intellect to lead him to the discovery of a God who is above the creation and outside of the creation. And so I'm not sure if we'll have time to read these, but this is another lovely suite of verses within this chapter.
Right. And there's a couple of ways to read this. One is that this is Abraham's own coming of age, so to speak, intellectually. So it starts with verse 74, and then goes on for the next several verses. Thus did we show Abraham the dominion of the heavens and the earth, that he might be among those possessing certainty. And when the night grew dark upon him, he saw a star, and he said, "This is my Lord." But when it set, he said, "I love not things that set." And then when he saw the moon rising, he said, "This is my Lord." But when it set, he said, "If my Lord does not guide me, I shall surely be among the people who are astray." Then when he saw the sun rising, he said, "This is my Lord." My camera has strayed. Let me see if I can bring it back.
There you go. Yes.
I think when I look down to read, I lose it. So I'm going to hold it up. So the sun, I said, "This is my Lord. This is greater. Hadha akbar." But when it set, he said, "O my people, truly I am quit of the partners you ascribe. Truly as a Hanif, which is a kind of single-minded monotheist, I have turned my face toward him who created the heavens and the earth, and I'm not of the idolaters." And his people disputed with him. And so this is brought forward as, because rational proofs through nature. And I've always, these verses have always puzzled me. They seem very simplistic and almost linear, whereas, it's not suddenly that you see the star and then later you see the moon and then later you see the sun. You kind of grow up with these things and come of age with them together. And so, one explanation was this, that, it was after a long time emerging from a cave, either in meditation or as growing up, and then seeing them in sequence as a seeker. But one reading, my own reading of this is indicated again by verse 83 that follows, which is along the lines of what we had read in Al-Baqarah. Do you remember when he argued with the king?
Yeah.
Where the argument was, of his opponent, and then showed the internal contradictions. So if the opponent says, "I give life and death," then all right, your premise is that you can do what my Lord can do. And so my Lord can bring up the sun from the east, bring it up from the west. In the same way, he is those people who believe around him. And this is not necessarily reflective of his own belief. And this is a theologically driven interpretation, in part because prophets have pure fitrah, so they don't necessarily go through this, but they have an innate belief that there's something greater than creation. But in verse 83 it says, تِلْكَ آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَلَى قَوْمِهِ. This was our argument that we gave Abraham against his people. And so he was actually role-playing again in trying to kind of be empathetic with the beliefs, but then showing their internal contradictions. And here God is showing us that if you're going to end our argument, then this is the best way to do it, is not simply to assert your own belief, but to actually understand the beliefs of others and work with them to deconstruct them as part of your intellectual engagement. So I don't know if that makes sense to you. Feel free to respond.
No. I think that's
Bond or-
it's a really compelling way to read those verses. Yeah, and it makes me wonder what false premises and arguments that are taken so seriously in our world today that need to be deconstructed in a way that is empathetic and yet compelling. You know, it's
Right.
it's we live in a world where so much that is unreal is taken for real, and so much that is real is subordinated to other ways of seeing and ways of thinking.
Yeah, but you know, Basit, there's this scholar, Basit Koshal. He's actually teaching a summer course for us. I invite people to look at it. We have some very interesting summer courses that are open to everybody, not just one with the Chicago History Museum, one with Azhar Usman on rewriting the script and the rise of Muslim creatives in Hollywood, and one by Sister Ishaq. She's doing her PhD in New York on different ways of learning in Islam, and Omar Muzaffar, the chaplain at Loyola University. Yeah. The one class, if anyone needs to take one class on Islam, Islam for Everyday Islam in a Troubled World. What's the title?
Something like, yeah, that's right. With
Islam
Omar.
for Everyone in a Troubled World. And then Basit Koshal, who I just mentioned, you know, he is really enamored by Abraham and his argument, his style of argumentation, and he engages modernity with an attempt to deconstruct it from within. So there's no use of scripture. It's pure argument versus argument. He derives that model from the kind of Abrahamic approach to engagement. And his summer course is called 7 Types of Atheism and One Maddening Puzzle, God in Modern Thought and Pre-Modern Culture. So I invite people who are interested at what we're offering. I hope you'll find it interesting.
That's wonderful. And I think that's actually a nice way to end tonight. I'd like to invite everybody to jump on the American Islamic College website and to take a look at what we're doing, what we've done, what's coming. And Basit was actually a classmate of Isra, whose name Umayya was not how we knew her in graduate school. So when she was a graduate student and I read her dissertation, I knew her as Isra at the University of Virginia. And Basit was a graduate student and colleague of Isra at the University of Virginia when I was teaching there and when I got to know both of them. So
no, she goes by Isra now. When I was in grad school with her at Hartford Seminary before.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah, and I knew her as Umayya.
Oh, so I only knew her as Isra and then when, yeah, that's why I was a little puzzled on our first night when there was a comment by Umayya and I couldn't remember an Umayya from UVA.
I should have said Isra. It's actually Umayya Isra. Yes, yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
All right. There's one question on saying more about miracles. Maybe we leave that for another time, or should we say a word on this?
No, it's I mean I'm not sure what more to say about them other than, I mean, there's a beautiful passage in Al-Ma'idah, this is verse 110, where it's very clear that the miracles of Jesus were done with God's power, but through Jesus. And the Quran makes it very clear that God gave these miracles, these unique abilities to Isa, to Jesus, and so I'll just read that, and it's might be a beautiful way to end the evening. This is ayah 110 from Surah Al-Ma'idah, the surah of the food, or on the table outstretched. And remember when God will say, or remember when God will say, "O Isa, son of Mary, O Jesus, son of Mary, remember my favor on you and on your mother, and how I strengthened you with the Holy Spirit, and you spoke to the people while in the cradle, and when of old age, and when I taught you the book and the wisdom and the Torah and the Injil, the Torah and the Gospels, and when you determined out of clay a thing like the form of a bird by my permission," meaning he breathed into clay and a bird flew forth, "and when you brought forth the dead by my permission, and when I withheld the children of Israel from you when you came to them with clear arguments, but those who disbelieved among them said, this is nothing but a clear enchantment," or sorcery, the same words. So we remember here that even those who witnessed the miracles of Jesus are saying the same things that the prophet in the subsequent surah is going to hear if he were to bring the Qur'an down, not as an oral recitation, but as a ready-made book. If he brought it to them as a ready-made book on parchment, they would say, this is just clear enchantment or sorcery. And so there's a beautiful passage here where the next several verses will continue on the topic of Jesus. And God says, did you tell people that they should be worshiping you and not God? And Jesus responds, glory be to you. It does not befit me that I should say what I had no right to say. You would indeed have known it. And you know what is in my mind, while I do not know what is in your mind. Surely you are the great knower of unseen things. And I did not say to them, except what you commanded me to say, to serve God, my Lord and your Lord. And I was a witness of them so long as I was among them. But when you did cause me to die, you were the watcher over them, and you are the witness over all things. And so there's a beautiful clarification, let's say, that these miracles that Jesus are attributed to Jesus are very much Quranically accepted, but they are all understood to be flowing from God's power and part of God's loving preference for Jesus, or that God gave Jesus particular gifts that he did not give to other messengers. Do you want to add to that, Mahan?
No, that was really nice. Maybe just quick point that the Prophet also is said to have had miracles, but then we hear that the Quran is his only miracle. And so how do you square kind of those two statements? And the way I've understood it is, the miracles that the Prophet had, like splitting of the moon or feeding, a large crowd with a small amount of food, and others, they were for the believers, but they weren't there as proofs of his revelation. They weren't said, they weren't presented as, look, this is a miracle, and so now you must take it as a basis for your belief. The basis for belief was the Quran, and that is sufficient, and the signs of God in the world around us. So that's one way, so the whole miracle narrative a little bit straight. And we have one more question. I'm only going to mention it, and then we'll let people ponder it for the morrow. This question is, I have always wondered why the prophets underwent such hardships in their lives when all they were doing was God's work. And so there'll be occasion to talk more about this. I'm thinking especially Al-Ankabut, but we leave you to ponder this as we wrap up tonight.
Yeah.
Inshallah. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. But it is a really powerful question and a powerful point that the messengers of truth and all that is good and life-giving, that that they're often the ones who are most despised and rejected. And we see that even among the ranks of those who are prophetic but not prophets. And we see that being played out in the world even now. So many people are being persecuted for standing up for what is right, obviously right and true, and they're being cut down because it conflicts with corporate or national agendas. And so may God give them strength and clarity and support from the rest of us when we witness that happening.
Ameen.
Why don't you close us out, Sidi?
By the passage of time through the ages, or by the late afternoon, at the end of the day, humankind is in a state of loss, except for those who believe and have righteous conduct and exhort each other to what is true, and also to persevere in the face of hardship.
Amen.
Ameen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahan, and thank you everybody who's joining us. And God willing, we'll see you tomorrow for night number 8, inshallah.
Inshallah. And we have some special guests coming up
Yes.
in the coming days, so stay tuned to be joining us, inshallah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.